Russia Tomorrow.
Sir Lawrence, thank you very much for being with us tonight. We have so many questions about the ongoing war in Ukraine. And first of all, I would like to ask you about the prospects of Russian behavior. They say, experts say, politicians say, ministers, analysts, that Russia will try a wide-scale offensive in a month or so. Would you agree with that?
I think they want to try an offensive. I think that's partly the reason why Gerasimov was put back in charge, because in the end, I don't think Putin is satisfied with holding on to defensive positions. I think he wants to expand the area of Russian control, certainly in the Donbass, possibly elsewhere. We presume that's why they've held back quite a lot of mobilized troops, why they're presumably trying to train them and equip them. I think it'll be very difficult for the Russians to launch an effective offensive in weeks, or even in a month or two. We know from this war that offensives are very difficult. All the Russian offensives have been very difficult. I mean, they've had these. They haven't had many successful ones since the start of the war. Really, what they've had since are sort of these grinding battles to take particular cities, which are reduced to rubble by the time they get there. So whether they really, given the combat power they've got, can manage anything very dramatic, I'm skeptical, but I don't doubt that they would like to.
And what if Ukraine does not get this Leopard 2 tanks and long-range missiles that Vladimir Zelensky and other representatives of Ukrainian government are asking for? What if they are not ready for this offensive? Would Russia try its chances? And also, when you say Russia would like to widen the territory that it controls, would you mean Kiev as well, maybe Odessa?
Well, I'm sure, again, they would like both of those, but I think that would be even harder. I think, and at the moment, they don't have enough in Belarus to mount an offensive from there, I don't think. So I would have thought you're talking more likely counteroffensives in Luhansk, Zaporizhia, possibly. But I don't think it will be in a wholly new area. I don't think they can get to Odessa, certainly not now. I think it's a mistake to suggest that too much depends on the Leopards and other tanks. I think they're actually quite low down in terms of Ukrainian needs. I mean, they're not unimportant. They'll make a difference, but they're not going to make the difference between defending against a Russian offensive or not. I think the artillery is important. There's already large numbers of infantry fighting vehicles going. The air defenses are particularly important. So I think the Leopards have got attention because there's been a political row about them, and because they are the sort of the ultimate offensive land weapon. Although they're not going to be used outside Ukraine, whereas long-range missiles might be. So I don't think one should get too obsessed by them. The German Leopards would take a long time to get to Ukraine anyway. The other Leopards less time. So it's politically important. Militarily, it's not unimportant. But a lot of the other stuff that was announced leading up to the Ramstein meeting, I'd say, is more important in the short term.
So, Lawrence, do you think that Ukraine has an opportunity, military opportunity, and enough support from the West to try to regain control over Crimea in upcoming months, for example? I think
Crimea, we're getting ahead of ourselves if we start looking at Crimea. It's obviously something, again, the Ukrainians would like to do. There's no mystery about that. But it's going to take a while before they're in any position to contemplate that. So I think the first question is, can they mount successful offensives over the next weeks, months? I think the answer is they can, but it's not straightforward. And I think they will want to be careful because you don't get too many chances at this. So I think the first stage is probably to push on in Luhansk, possibly, again, they'll be looking at Zaporizhzhia. But I'm not privy to the Ukrainian General Staff strategy. What's clear, they've said so, is they will want to see some serious movement. I mean, they had a lot of movement in September. Then a combination of the weather and the Mobics has held them up. And it's been more of a slow grind. Plus, they got drawn into this attritional battle in Solidar and Bakhmut, which obviously isn't over yet. So I think they'll want to get onto the offensive. I think they'll be watching what the Russians are up to quite carefully, because what they don't want to do is commit in one place and then find the Russians charging in somewhere else. So I think that they'll be watching quite carefully for the right moment.
So the whole world was watching Ramstein last week and trying to understand what happened there. So is there a real conflict between Germany and the US, Germany and other members of NATO alliance, in your opinion?
Well, there's been an argument, clearly, you can't hide that. It's an argument in which there's agreement on the bulk of the issue, that Russia is engaged in a war of conquest that needs to be stopped, that needs to be reversed. Ukraine has to be kept going economically, and it needs the military support to make a real breakthrough on the ground. All that is agreed. I think there's a particular issue which is very much a German issue related to their past, but also to the way these debates have developed in the SPD over decades about how Germany should act as an arms supplier. What makes a difference? Is there a difference between defensive and offensive weapons? And these are all, in some ways, arcane debates to non-Germans, but they seem to matter to some Germans. And it's been damaging because instead of an impressive display of unity, we've got this lingering argument, which I suspect will be over quite soon. But, Germany is still providing Ukraine with a lot of kit, the Marder infantry fighting vehicles, along with the Bradley, the Americans are sending. So there's plenty of stuff going. And a lot was agreed that is probably, as I said before, more important than the Leopards.
When we talk about the position of Russian government, and I'm asking you as a military historian as well, can we compare the situation with the nuclear threat of the Cold War period? Now, we can see that Germany and maybe other countries like France are hesitating to provide Ukraine this Leopards or other weaponry because they say there can be a threat to the security of the European countries. And they mean, partly they mean this nuclear threat, I suppose. So Dmitry Medvedev, Vyacheslav Volodin and others, they are threatening the world with a third world war and with the nuclear weapons. Could you and would you try to compare that situation, the Caribbean crisis, to the situation that we are facing right now?
You can compare. There's actually some continuity, and the continuity is that Moscow is using nuclear deterrence to deter a direct NATO military threat. So I don't think this has anything to do with tanks or supplying weapons to Ukraine. Well, I mean, Medvedev is a bit of a joke now. I mean, I don't take. He talked about nuclear threats incessantly during during the crisis, during the war. What we look at what Putin has said, and Putin has said from day one, and has repeated it in press conferences and statements, that if NATO directly engages on Ukraine's behalf, then since all bets are off, anything is possible, terrible things could happen. And I think that has worked for Russia. NATO has been deterred in that sense. It is not directly fighting. It's not fighting side by side with the Ukrainians in the way, for example, it fought when Iraq tried to take over Kuwait in 1990.
Yeah.
So in that sense, deterrence has played a part. Equally, it's played a part in the other direction. Russia has not attacked NATO countries that are engaged in assisting Ukraine. So it's contained the conflict in that way. And I doubt if Putin wants to jeopardize it. And it's also not very clear how nuclear weapons could be used to turn the fight around, as it were. The only threat is a sort of escalation to some Armageddon, but that's, people move very quickly from talking about a tactical nuclear weapon, which is sort of a nonsense term in a way, because all weapons like this are not purely tactical. But it would, but by and large, those sort of systems don't make wouldn't turn round a battle. So I think it's best to not to dismiss the role of nuclear weapons. Has been very important, but in a passive sort of way, helping to contain the conflict, suiting Russia as it does so. I think the chances of it being of them actually being used are still pretty small.
Pretty small. And the final question.
It's not zero. You can't say.
Not zero.
You can't say it's zero because I'm not. We don't quite understand Putin's decision making. He's taken one stupid decision. He may take more, but it's not obvious how what benefit he gets, and a lot that he could lose, especially given the view that China and India have taken on the matter. I don't think he would find a lot of support.
The final question is about Russia's plans, Putin's plans. I've heard you saying that Russia would like to try this new wide-scale offensive and so on and so forth, but could you give us a brief forecast for 2023?
I wish I could. I think that both sides want to have offensives, that's clear. How those offensives work out will make a lot of difference. Ukraine will keep on fighting, whatever, because I don't think Ukraine feels it's got any choice, given how Russia has behaved already on Ukrainian territory. It wants to get the Russians out. So we're looking always at what it takes to persuade Russia that they need to end this game, that they need to withdraw. Now, I think politically, it's extraordinarily difficult to imagine Putin doing that, because as soon as he does it, there's a reckoning. Why did he have this war in the first place? What's he achieved? And there's no good answer to that. He's achieved very little. And he's made things a lot worse for both Ukraine and Russia. So I don't think, if he can, I think he'll also keep the war going. So one scenario is simply that the war carries on, perhaps with different, with one side having, probably the Ukrainians having made some gains, but not quite sufficient, but at a lower level of intensity, because I don't think either side can sustain the war at the current level of intensity. It's already down a bit on last year, and I think that's the shortages of ammunition, even if the Russians feel they've got endless supplies of men, which I'm not sure they have that either. So I think, so one scenario is it carries on without a conclusion, but at a lower level, possibly with some sort of agreed truce ceasefire. I find it very hard to see how there's going to be a peace negotiation, because the Ukrainians will want things that Russia won't deliver, full withdrawal, reparations, war crimes tribunals, or whatever. And Ukraine certainly isn't going to agree to the partition of its country in favor of Russia. So I don't see, so long as Putin is in power, that is a peace negotiation as being an option. The third possibility, somewhere in the middle, not in the middle, third possibility is that there is a ceasefire negotiation of some sort at a point, I think, when the Russian military realizes that its position is becoming untenable, that it can't sustain its position indefinitely. But that requires success in the Ukrainian offensives and a lack of success in theirs. So we're waiting to see what happens in, so I'd say, the March to June period.
But
and then we'll have a better idea.
If it lasts long, just following up, we have heard that William Burns, the CIA director, was in Kiev assuring Ukraine that the support of the United States would last at least until August, the end of upcoming summer. What's going to be with the support of the Western society, Western alliance? Is it going to be as strong as it is right now? Because I know that some countries are very tough on Russia, but some are not. We have mentioned Germany and France. What would happen with this?
I think there's a lot of factors which will determine the support. At the moment, the commitment's been made. To back away from Ukraine at the moment would mean that all the effort that's been put in would be at risk. So you're looking at, and this is partly because Ukraine has made itself worth backing through its resilience and its growing military capacity. But if that started to be doubted, that would affect attitudes. But I think the main thing is that the Russian behavior, including its inability, it seems, to offer any sort of political way out, really gives the Europeans and the Americans little choice. If there was an obvious deal available that wouldn't be seen as a betrayal of Ukraine, then there'd be a lot of pressure to look at it, or at least to explore it. But there isn't. I mean, Putin hasn't offered anything. So I think politically, I don't think there's a big change coming. In capacity terms, there are issues because this is a very greedy war. It uses up a lot of resource, a lot of ammunition, and it's not easy to sustain it. But it's not easy on the Russian side either. So I think the capacity constraints then that may become more important, but it does depend on Ukraine showing that it can use wisely the support it's been given. But in the end, politically, having gone this far with Ukraine, I don't think the Western countries can suddenly walk away.
Thank you very much, and hope to see you again soon on TV Rain.
TV Rain is on the air. For 12 years, we remained the only independent news channel in Russia. We had to leave, forced out of the country by new repressive laws after the first week of the war. Our freedom crushed by the authorities.
Мы приняли решение, что мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We have operated as a European company from Europe and now also broadcast in English.
Kherson has surrendered.
Russia's propaganda targets have changed.
Putin cries havoc. We want to tell you firsthand what is really happening in Russia. Subscribe to TV Rain Newsroom on YouTube and let's take a look at our future together.